Hi everyone, in this video we're going to look at reading assessment in the context of your participation in professional learning communities. Now it's very important that you learn the concept of professional learning communities in this course because the state as well as local district schools have made it very clear to us that they expect you to be able to participate meaningfully in professional learning communities from day one that you are a beginning teacher. So I really recommend that you save this video, re-watch it later, because it's going to help you in job interviews. So first of all, here are some resources for you to use when it comes to preparing yourself to know the science of reading and to speak the science of reading as it is understood by the state of Arkansas. I especially recommend to you further look into the reading pathways to proficiency that's been set up by the state of Arkansas. That's the first link that you see here. It's really going to help you prepare. It includes some professional development modules that I recommend for you. You'll notice that I'm also giving you some optional links to discussions by Nell Noddings as well as from the Reading League. The video from the Reading League is very consistent with the approach to science reading that the state is wanting you to take. So if you watch that video from Reading League Wisconsin, it'll help you speak the language of the science of reading as the state is strongly recommending. The discussion by Neil Duke is much more nuanced, and it'll give you an understanding of some of the broader debates in the field. In a nutshell, you'll notice if you watch the Reading League video that there's a strong emphasis from proponents in the science of reading camp, such as Mark Seidenberg, of clinical designed, experimental design research, replicated studies in neurosciences and the clinical research that is strong, and I don't think there's any debate that that's part of the sciences of reading from the field. Where the debate comes in is what about qualitative research in addition to various forms of quantitative research. There is a very particular approach to reading that those who use the term science of reading are recommending, and there's also various models of reading out there that I've not yet really discussed in this course. I'm not sure if I will have time to really discuss them that much in this course, that are kind of being left out of the discussions from proponents of the term science of reading. In this video, I'm continuing to focus on what the state wants. That's a strong focus on reading rope, a strong focus on the simple view of reading, explicit and systematic instruction. So notice again, when we talk about assessment and intervention in reading, you have to address the various strands of Scarborough's reading rope. That's language comprehension and the various strands of language comprehension becoming increasingly strategic for the reader, along with word recognition strands becoming increasingly automatic. And when these strands are tied together, the language comprehension along with the word recognition, you get increasingly skilled reading. And as a student becomes more proficient in the use of these strategies as well as word recognition, that student becomes skillful. Now you want to, in your assessment, have early identification as well as prevention of reading difficulties in a proactive manner. So again, when we talk about the science of reading approach as promoted here in the state of Arkansas, as well as in many states that are using the term science of reading, including Missouri, if you're in Missouri, it's based largely on the simple view of reading. Decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Decoding includes, of course, phonemic awareness and phonics. Language comprehension includes vocabulary and oral language, and oral reading fluency is understood as the bridge between language comprehension and reading comprehension. We need to take a good look, as we have been doing throughout this course, of phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness includes noticing and thinking about and working with phonemes, those smallest units of spoken language. And it should be taught here in Arkansas as promoted here by the schools, and the state is very clear that this is what they want, using a structured literacy approach, which emphasizes the sounds of spoken language distinct from and prior to teaching phonics. Phonemic awareness should be used as a starting point for print instruction, and you see a link to a further discussion on phonological and phonemic awareness. When we talk about vocabulary as well as oral language instruction, vocabulary in the upper grades, oral language in the lower grades, early grades, you're talking about understanding the meaning of words that are spoken, heard, read, and written. And again, both vocabulary as well as oral language are to be taught using a structured literacy approach, as wanted here in the state and in your district schools. So oral language is used as a reference point for print again. You want to use books for reading aloud that are more challenging than those students can read independently. And as you're reading a book aloud, you can give explicit instruction in how you use various reading strategies to figure out words and to figure out meaning in the text. And scripted dialogue. Structured literacy, it tends to be very scripted, very much pre-planned. Phonics instruction deals with knowing relationships between sounds, in other words, phonemes, and letters. Letters deal with graphemes. Structured literacy approach should be used again both in phonics as well as in spelling. This deals with intentional instruction, very explicit direct instruction in letter sound combination, sequenced from easier tasks and easier concepts up to harder concepts in both reading as well as in spelling. And there's an application of word reading in the print. And you see a further discussion here. When we deal with reading fluency as well as oral reading fluency, we're talking about reading connected text accurately, fluently, and for meaning. And again, the state wants you to use a structured literacy approach to fluency instruction. That means young students reading text that is controlled to include only those phonics patterns that have been explicitly taught. Don't have students deal with texts and fluency tasks that you haven't previously explicitly taught in a structured literacy approach. Fluency is built after accuracy in reading is established. You want to use high degree of teacher-student interaction with immediate corrective feedback when an error is made. And then we get to reading comprehension. This deals with gaining meaning from text. In a structured literacy approach, this means background knowledge, text structure, and strategies are explicitly modeled and practiced, again, in planned, often scripted, sequential progression. And for a broader take on reading comprehension and research in reading comprehension, I've included a discussion by P. David Pearson. Now for context, P. David Pearson is one of those people who kind of problematizes the discussion. He's more of a quilt weaver, if you will, drawing some from both schools of thought, radical middle, if you will. If you look at the science of reading approach that we're talking about here as one end of a continuum, and then whole language as another end of the continuum, David Pearson would kind of be in the middle. And speaking very, very honestly, because I'm trying to give you instruction that is the science of reading. I want you to be employed and employable and an excellent teacher. But very honestly, I think you can tell in my other videos and in my writings that you've read that I'm more in the middle, radical middle kind of thing. So that's okay. It's okay to know where your teacher comes from, so long as I'm also making sure that you have the knowledge and skills that I know you need and that I know that Arkansas wants. So your instruction needs to be explicit. very direct, explicit instruction of contexts and concepts and skills. So directly model new skills for your students, whether it's vocabulary, fluency, comprehension strategies, guide students to the correct responses with immediate corrective feedback. Practice skills until students gain mastery and automaticity in these skills. Your instruction should be systematic. Systematic means that it is consistent. You develop routines with corrective behaviors when you see errors. You plan your instructional time very, very carefully to maximize time on task. And you give repetition as well as cumulative review for the students, as well as assessment. The review is based upon the assessment and leads to assessment. Your instruction should be sequenced. This means the skills are taught in order from easier to harder. The prerequisite knowledge and skill is taught first, leading to eventually more difficult skills. Component or foundational skills are taught directly in order to eventually help students gain higher order skills when they are learning phonics or how to figure out vocabulary terms, that sort of thing. You teach with intentional sequence across lessons as well as across grade levels. And multidisciplinary, very intentional. You do all of this work within a professional learning community that's driven by assessment. A professional learning community is an ongoing process in which educators are working collaboratively to achieve better results for the students that they serve. Professional learning communities practice and structure to create a sustainable focus on learning. The focus here is, when it comes to reading, are students gaining the reading skills that they want? Why or why not, based upon assessment, and what can we do about it? You focus on building a collaborative culture in which the learning of the students is what counts. And for more, I have a discussion from Richard Dufour. Dufour and Associates are largely known for the professional learning communities movement. Although they're not the only ones associated with professional learning communities. But if you go to professional development, they have many teachers throughout the state, as well as professors like myself across the state are receiving in PLC. You'll notice Solution Tree and a lot of writings by Richard Dufour. And if you want more about the professional learning community movement and approach as emphasized by Arkansas, then just look up books published by Solution Tree and Dufour on professional learning communities, and that will help you to nail a job interview. Because like I said, the state and local district schools have made it abundantly clear that they do want you to know something about professional learning communities when you interview for jobs, that they want you to come out of undergrad as well as graduate education prepared for participation in professional learning communities, to join their professional learning communities. So it will help you to be able to speak the language of a PLC. Some key concepts of professional learning communities include focus on student learning, collaborative culture, results-oriented, and data-driven instruction, information-driven instruction. Your instruction is based upon ongoing analysis of data through assessment. Some pillars of a PLC include understanding your mission and having a clear knowledge of your mission. That includes your school's mission, your mission as a department, and your mission as an educator. A clear vision. Here's where I'm going. Here's what I'm doing and why. Your values. What are the values of your school? What are the values of your department? What are your values as an educator? And your goals of what you're trying to accomplish as a school, as a professional learning community, and as an educator. And those are continuously reevaluated. They all inform each other. There's an approach to continuous improvement that's driven by what is sometimes called a quality cycle, sometimes called a Deming cycle. W. Edwards Deming is the one who pioneered this approach. Basically, you plan the actions that you're going to take together as a team. So you plan your instruction, right? You put your instruction in action, that's the do cycle. Then you check, you assess Is this having the desired result or not for student learning? You act based upon the analysis of your assessment. Are learning goals being met or not? Why or why not? Then you plan revisions to make to your instruction, and the cycle is continuous. Now, if you go to this link that I provided for you from Deming, you'll notice that this is based upon business management. It's based upon total quality management. The language that you're hearing about professional learning communities from Dufour, Marzano, Robert Marzano has a lot to say about professional learning communities, as do others. The language of professional learning communities, including the literature on professional learning communities, comes from research on effective schools, but it also comes from the total quality management movement in the business management community, in the management sciences. And Deming was a scholar of management sciences. So that's why you'll hear him talking about business here. But if you understand his language and what he's talking about in terms of quality management, you'll also understand how professional learning communities are intended to operate. There's a very strong focus on student learning objectives and meeting of student learning objectives. So teachers collaborate to analyze data. This analysis is used to determine what methods of instruction are used as a team. The data is focused on student learning, and from there you figure out what do I do about differentiating instruction? How do I group students together? How do I guide my overall instruction as a team together? So again, notice lesson planning and assessment is intended to be more of a group activity than something that's done alone or in a silo in this approach. So when we talk about assessment here in the PLC approach, it's very important to provide space for educators to work collaboratively. You set common goals and you strive to meet those common goals together. You gather together and you analyze the data from your assessments together. From there, you create new assessments. These might be assessments from scratch, or you might decide which assessments to use. And of course, the focus is always on addressing student achievement of learning goals. You work collaboratively as a team to reach these goals. Members are mutually accountable. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone on the team must necessarily have the exact same definition of reading comprehension, because honestly speaking, if you read the research, you'll find different definitions out there. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that everyone on the team has to agree on the exact same approach to models of reading processes or theoretical frameworks on reading that guide your instruction, because there are multiple frameworks out there beyond what we've discussed in this class so far. For instance, constructivists tend to have some issues with the approach to the science of reading that we've been talking about. This approach to the science of reading that we've been talking about in this course leans heavily into behaviorist learning models if you've studied learning theory. So you don't have to have 100% agreement on everything, but you do have to have enough consensus and enough agreement on basic goals and how you're going to work together, even if in some ways there might also be some disagreement within the group. So there's a focus on ensuring that all students have access to equitable and same skills and knowledge base. Oftentimes you'll use a common set of formative assessments, as well as sometimes even a common set of summative assessments. Remember, formative assessments are used oftentimes during your instruction. You're assessing learning as it is taking place. Summative assessment would be after your instruction, for instance, a unit test, learning that has taken place. So the school creates a system of interventions and extensions for student learning. So for the students that are ahead of pace, What extension can you provide for students that are falling behind, struggling? Then you would have an intervention. Again, evidence informs practice. So you want to ask certain core essential questions as part of your analysis of your assessments. What is it that we want our students to know and be able to do? How will we know if students have learned it? How will we respond if and when students do not learn it? Because let's face it, sometimes students are not going to learn everything. How will we extend the learning for students who have demonstrated proficiency maybe ahead of pace? And a key essential outcome that you're looking for is what is it that we want all students to know and be able to do. So as a team, when you're talking about reading instruction as a PLC, this is the core question that you're trying to come to a consensus on that drives your instruction. Your assessments are driven by one common question. How will we know if each student has learned the task that we want our students to learn? How will we respond when students don't learn it? That gets into intervention. You have pre-planned steps in place for enrichment as well as acceleration. For instance, a key question might be, how will we extend for the student that already has demonstrated mastery? Because you don't want students to get bored. Common aspects of successful schools. This comes from research that's within the professional learning community literature. Michael Fullen. You want to focus on student work through assessment, change instruction practice based upon data and information to get better results. And you work together as a team, as a learning community. You have a clear vision, a commitment on learning for each student, clear understanding of what it is that you want students to learn in literacy as well as other areas, and you have an ongoing process for monitoring learning on a timely basis and adjusting your instruction accordingly. You want to be very clear about your essential outcomes. You want to develop common assessments as a team, establish your targets as well as benchmarks, often through benchmark assessment. You want to analyze the results, plan for instruction and improve strategies based upon data, and discuss student learning needs in an ongoing way as a team. An important term that I want you to know, and this would really help you on your job interviews, is guaranteed and viable curriculum. That's the specific grade level content that you identify as what you want to make sure that your students are learning, which correspond, and then you identify corresponding instructional time to make sure that students are learning this content. You want to prioritize learning standards by grade level content as essential learning outcomes. This process ensures a common understanding and collective focus on what your students must know and what they must be able to do. You continuously refine and clarify your instruction as well as assessment techniques based upon this, and you measure student success, and you make sure that you implement instruction to best meet these needs based upon your identified curriculum. You want to have, or based upon assessment, a multi-tiered system of supports. Your school is likely to already have set up a system of multi-tiered supports. Now, oftentimes this multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, is based upon RTI, response to intervention models. RTI was pioneered out of Vanderbilt University, Lyndon Douglas Fuchs. So commonly in multi-tiered system of supports, the teachers work together analyzing assessments to identify strengths and concerns of students, to determine cause of difficulty that students are having, target desired learning outcomes, design intervention steps to help the students, and monitor student progress. You want to have screening techniques, screening assessments, in which you identify students and possibly instructional systems that are at risk of failure. You want to monitor progress to track effectiveness of instruction as well as possible intervention that's needed. You want to have diagnosis of determining what are the next steps for instruction and intervention. And you want to analyze outcomes, identify whether instruction and intervention has been successful or not, why or why not. Obviously in here, for each of these, you would have screening assessments such as the MAP test. You would have progress monitoring assessments, diagnostic assessments, for instance, diagnostic assessment in reading. So again, the progress monitoring, oftentimes you've got CBM, curriculum-based measures, are commonly used in this approach to monitor student progress. So in response to intervention, you, generally speaking, have three tiers. Tier 1 is general education, which includes screening of student needs. Tier 2 would have your basic level of interventions based upon research-based and evidence-based instruction that supports students gaining mastery of skills and standards where they're beginning to struggle. And then in Tier 3, as students continue to struggle, Tier 3, you get increasingly targeted, and Tier 3 interventions would be delivered by a specialist. You want to make sure that your data is basically data-driven, your data-driven instruction, in other words. So consider multiple data points, in other words, multiple types of assessments: formative assessment, summative assessment as a general education teacher. Your specialists on site would also be working with screening measures and diagnostic assessments. And you use these assessments to determine instruction. And as needed, interventions come into place where you have supports for students that may be struggling for various reasons, be it academic or otherwise. You want to make sure, as we come on near the close of this video, make sure that you're working together as a team collaboratively. So focus on what is the difficulty that students are having, why is the difficulty occurring, what should we do about it, and as we take action, did this work? Notice how these questions align with the Deming cycle that I talked about earlier. Plan, do, check, act. So you want to make sure that you're continuously improving the quality of student learning as well as equity that students are experiencing in their instruction. You want to promote discussion as a team that's based upon evidence of data and analysis of data rather than just spouting off opinions, of course. You want to foster collective responsibility for student learning and student success. And finally, focus on the following 4 questions. What do we want our students to learn? That's determined by targeting the essential, guaranteed, and viable curriculum. Second question would be, how will we know that students are learning? That's determined by analysis of frequent team-developed common assessments, formative and summative and otherwise. How will we respond when students are not learning? That's determined by systematic intervention. How will we respond when they do learn? That would be enrichment activities and extension activities for the students. So hopefully this helped you. Take care.